Okay, so geodata frame is not exactly the object that we are looking for. We need to tell RMSP that this is an actual drilling data, and more specifically, this is a caller data. So for that, we have RMSP.caller data. The first argument of the caller data is the data frame, which we can still use the read CSV to load that data frame. But additionally, we need to provide some more information, which we call metadata. And the information that is usually required for caller data are the X, Y, and Z coordinates and the drill hole ID as well. So if I press comma and shift tab, I can take a look at the documentation of the caller data. And if I scroll down, I see that the metadata for caller data is the drill hole ID, X, Y, Z coordinates. So we can start typing. So DHID equals, and then I can copy from my check value range. I know that I have a column that's called DHID that contains the IDs of the drill holes. Now we have to figure out what is the column for the X coordinate. That seems to be easting. And then Y is equals to northing. And Z is equals to elevation. So with all that set, we now fully defined the caller data with all the metadata required. So if I run this cell, it's going to load the caller data into a from the CSV and build this object. We still have access to check value range because underlying the caller data, the most basic functionality is coming from the geodata frame. By default, this check value range function is gonna omit all that metadata. If you want to show all the metadata, you just have to use the argument show meta and set it to true. So now we see all the metadata, the additional column that's now part of the metadata as well. So the next part that I would like to talk about is to take a look at the metadata itself. So there are a few ways of looking to the metadata of any RMSP geodata frame object. In this case, if I do caller.get meta, this is going to generate a table with the metadata as the indices of the data frame, and the value are the column names that I provided at initialization. Of course, if I provided some value in here that's not in the data, it would still show here. So this function have a couple more options. One of the options is to check if the column exists, and the other column is to show whether or not that metadata is a minimum requirement for this data object. So if I want to see both information, I just have to set this to true and true, and this will check if the drill hole ID column actually exists, and all the other columns, if they do exist, it's set to true. If they do not exist, because I made some mistake in here and they are not part of the data frame, this exists is gonna return false. And for the caller data, all the metadata is required. It's absolutely required that you have drill hole ID, X coordinate, Y coordinate, and Z coordinate to define a caller data. For other types of objects, the requirements might be different, but for caller, those are the required metadata. There are a couple other functions that are related to metadata that I would like to mention. One of them is the caller get meta slice. So this function is going to return a copy of your data with only the columns that are metadata of that data type. So you will see here that it did not return the drill hole length, because that's not part of the metadata. So that can be useful. And the other one is get meta dictionary. So with this function, it returns a dictionary where the keys are the metadata keys and the values are the columns that are attached to that metadata. Another reason why metadata is so important is because it informs some properties of this object that are used elsewhere. For instance, every spatial object in RMSP has this visualizer function. So for instance, I can do color.view3D, and this will generate a 3D visualization of the color locations. So you can see that I didn't need to specify what are my coordinates, because the object itself knows what the coordinates are. So for instance, if I click into one of these locations, I can see the coordinates in here. And these numbers are coming from the metadata.